Hey, Kevin.
Hey James, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good, good. Thanks for writing back so fast. I think we got everything under control.
Yeah.
Guess the biggest question now is just who's going to drive the slide deck?
Yeah, I'm happy to if that works. I
Cool.
threw in a last minute change just a minute ago just to show on our last slide that we're now at 10 million in facilitated sponsorships with ZipSprout, which is pretty cool. So we want to trumpet that a little bit, but otherwise, yeah. Either way, you dove into the research. We have some really interesting findings. I'm hoping though that we keep it just kind of pretty casual and just chat through, use the slides for reference. Not really speak off to every word on the slides, but just kind of keep it casual and chat about some really cool findings.
Good man. You got the job? Sounds great to me.
Awesome, that sounds good.
Cool. So we're already recording just for information and transcribing. You will all get a link to the recording and the transcription after the meeting. So it's not a perfect webinar environment, but pretty close.
Sounds great. All right. Oh, it looks like we might have to admit people one at a time.
Let me do that. Okay, I can handle that.
Great. All right, welcome, Craig. Yeah, this is great. I'm really excited about the research, and the more that I've dug into this, Kevin, the more that I've realized that it's a fair amount of it is it's intuitive, from the perspective of not necessarily brand new information, although it's so nice to have good solid confirmation on something that I think is on a lot of minds right now, in a number of ways, namely just how much of an impact is AI having on visibility, and what happens with the process. What do humans really do? We're spending a lot of time understanding as best as we can what people are searching for and simulating those prompts so we can understand what happens at that point. But a lot of that is simulation and speculation, and so it's really nice to see data at this level where we can really unpack and see what's happening, essentially. So yeah, I'm excited to have this chat.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I don't say this lightly, but I think this research really fills some big gaps that no other research has highlighted so far. So everybody, everybody should be running around screaming a little bit, because I think there's some like really important behavior that comes to light of how people actually react with AI search, especially when it comes to these high priced items. So this is pretty profound. I was very excited to see that stood up.
Yeah, really excellent point. Yeah, very good point. Yeah, so should we just kind of jump in and maybe use the slide deck to talk from? And okay, great.
Let's do
And
this.
then we'll just sort of see where the conversation goes. Don't mean to hold us to it too directly, but it'll give us a kind of a direction here. Is that coming through okay?
Yes, looking good.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So here's really the challenge, and this was, why do this study? Why do we need another data study to read about on LinkedIn or looked at, or dig into in articles? But and I don't remember how long you've been in SEO and in this space. A long time, Kevin, I remember. But for me, it's almost 30 years now, or somewhere kind of right around that. And a whole bunch of cycles through that where SEO died in some way, or that was the proclamation. But this time, it definitely feels different in terms of the amount of pressure, especially in-house teams are under, to explain, to communicate, to defend budget. All while things are looking, arguably worse. And so one thing that often comes up is programmatic teams, for example. Hey, look, our conversions are fine, kind of thing. We're weathering this storm, sort of, to some degree, and that's great. We need those stable elements, and that's one of the benefits of renting the space. You know, you know what you're getting, you get what you pay for, sort of thing. And so, what do SEOs, where the real opportunity to go beyond that, you know, pay per click model or that programmatic model? How do we kind of weather this storm, sort of thing, when everything is shifting so you know, so much? And Kevin, I'm just going to kind of walk through this, but please interject as much as you know, as much as you want.
Totally. Maybe one quick comment here. I agree with all the points on the slide, and I think another really big one is that you also have this massive pressure on executives like CMOs or VPs and head ofs and directors to show impact on AI search, right? One of the most common stories that I hear these days is we need to show, you know, more visibility in AI. And it doesn't even matter where that comes from, right? But sometimes it comes from the leader themselves. Sometimes it comes from the investors, right? Sometimes it doesn't, but it's there, right? There is a desire. There is a massive amount of fear of missing the next Google and being left behind.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you have, you know, we have, like, over the last 3 years built this body of knowledge of what we can track and kind of some early levers that work, but it's still really hard, to understand what people do on these AI search platforms, because we're not getting data, right? We're not getting any user behavior data from whether it's ChatGPT or it's Google, right? There's very little data. And two, how that turns into business impact, right? So there's this massive pressure point. And on the other side, there's there's not a room with an escape hatch, right? And so I think the worry is a little bit that if that pressure gets big enough, at some point this whole thing will explode or implode or whatever you want to call it, depending on whether you're on Earth or in space. But there will be this big mess. And I think, again, I don't say this lightly, but I think with this research, we've really filled some like major gaps that weren't visible before that we can now use to answer some of these questions.
Yeah. That's a great call out. You know, I think that the first work that I did in SEO was to show up higher in Alta Vista search results. And so, you know, and over time we've contracted and condensed and gotten down to the point where in many ways, really it is the universe of Google. It's sort of like this single solar system that we have all focused on, and that's been beneficial, understanding you know, one platform. And certainly there are other search engines and other destination sites, but do we make changes to our site to benefit those other ones at the expense of Google when that's where all the search comes from? And just to level set, that's still where all of the search is coming from. But that's why this research is so interesting. I think we should jump into the research, but that's why this research is so interesting, because we really are talking about Google. And one thing I also wanted to just mention at the top of this as we dig in here, Kevin, is we often see comparisons between AI search and Google versus Google kind of thing. And, you know, one thing that this study helped to make clear, I think, which is definitely worth mentioning a few times, is Google is AI, and they've been using AI for an extended period of time, and it's in the algorithm and it's in what we've been seeing on it. And so it's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison if we say Google versus AI. We could say other non-Google LLMs versus AI, or other RAG models that have a search component versus AI. But one of the things that I just wanted to call out is it's not so much Google versus AI, because Google is also AI, and they've got two very prominent instances of AI. And that's one of the things that this looked at, was kind of separating it out. So I would say we're talking about conventional Google search, which includes or may include AI overviews and a link to a, you know, dive deeper in AI mode link, versus AI mode. If you go directly to google.com/AI, you can get right into AI mode. And that is what we're really talking about here. So just in terms of these, you know, these metrics and numbers that we talk about, for example, here we're talking specifically and explicitly about AI mode, and the fact that 88% of users took the shortlist, the whatever we want to call it. I don't think the industry has really landed on a term, recommendation rank, or that short list of recommendations. 88% of users in this study, which was a very in-depth study where it was not it was not controlled to the degree that we said, click here and go here and choose this. It was more like, here's your prompt. Some of the users are going to google.com, others are going right into AI mode. Now explore a major purchase decision, and voice over how you would do it. And so we're tracking this very in-depth study that did that, essentially. And this was one of the big takeaways, that 88% of users chose their final decision right out of that shortlist. How does this land with you?
I mean, this is crazy. I'm not sure, again, like if people are realizing how important this is, but essentially what we're having here is 4 products that are pretty pricey, right? Stuff like insurance or a washing machine, right? These are purchases that usually take a lot of research, take a lot of consideration. They're big, big decisions for most people. And the fact that almost everyone just accepts what the AI says is mind-blowing in 2 ways. First of all, the trust towards AI, right? Like you hear all these stats, right, of like how low that trust actually is in surveys, and then you see people in kind of the real world, and they show exactly the opposite behavior. So that is very, very interesting. And I said this before. This is a very strong hint at how important AI search is, right? Like, I think it can be disguised in the data because we don't get a lot of referral traffic from AI and even from Google, right? Like, we saw this data that even when Google shows AI overviews or AI mode, the majority of people won't click on citations and links, right? But this data point really shows that people take and accept the recommendation from AI, and they take it as the word of God, right? Like, it's like the thing, right? They barely question it. They don't go back. They don't research, right? It's like, wow, I did not see that coming.
Yeah, I didn't either, especially because, if you poke at the AI answer a little bit, you can find holes. It's not even that, that difficult, that challenging. And we talked about it, especially earlier on, as hallucinations. Here is this AI model hallucinating on something, which really it boils down to the AI model inferring something that they don't have high confidence in, that they don't have a source that they can easily cite or reference or verify. And so they're trying to answer our question, and they sometimes infer what the answer might be, sort of thing. And so we know if we could poke some holes in it pretty easily. So that was one of the things that stuck out to me here as well, was that's a very, very high percentage of people that just took it at face value. Right or wrong, this is what the human behavior is showing us. And so, when we talk about losing clicks, how does that translate? And what we found in the study was that AI mode represented a 0-click share of 64%. And here's what you mentioned, Kevin. These were major purchases, kind of thing that we were looking at in buying insurance, a high-end TV, a laptop, a washer and dryer. These are not, $50 or $100 purchases that we're talking about here.
Exactly. So look, this is interesting. I found a much higher 0-click share earlier in research. Also looking at user behavior, we found that it's almost 99%, right? The majority of the time, people don't click out. But that was like a very broad. It was not looking at high-priced purchase items or maybe one, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's an interesting curve that we can see here where the price, or maybe value, if you will, of a product has an impact on 0-click share. But 64% is obviously still very, very high, right? It means that the majority of times no click happened, and it goes hand in hand with that earlier finding that the majority of the time people just take the recommendation of AI as the thing, as the best option available.
Yeah. Yeah. And, certainly through a conversation, not necessarily a one prompt answer, but through a conversation, it's incredibly powerful. In fact, just to zoom out here really quickly, because we're talking about this, if you look at the new layouts of how we're seeing, this was, from AI mode clicking on a one of the results and loading this new split view that we're seeing now from Google. And so we've got the chat on the side, and then I can look at and click through the different elements on the right in the main screen. This is an evolved way to do research and dig into things. And we're seeing more of this. You don't have to go into AI mode to see a version of a split screen. You mentioned the citations along the side a bit ago when we were talking about that as well. So, but search is evolving very quickly, and that's why this is so meaningful to understand how people are getting to decision making essentially as they go through the process, especially on something like it's a bigger purchase decision, as you mentioned. This was interesting too when it was not just that they were choosing from the recommendation list, which is shorter, by the way, too. We typically don't see 10 plus items in that final recommendation list. A lot of times it's 3 to 5, maybe 5 to 7, something like that. So first position still matters. 74% of the participants chose the first item in that list as their top list. It's a different position one. It's not the 10 blue links, but that position still matters, and it matters a whole heck of a lot.
Man, that is the thing. That is the thing, right? If you ask me, what is the most surprising result of the whole study, it's that.
Yeah.
And it's that because it shows that rank still matters, but rank just exists in a different way. It's not 10 blue links anymore. I mean, it hasn't been for a long time, blah, blah. I spare you the spiel. But this shows that, when people get a shortlist, which is usually 3, sometimes 5, sometimes 10 products or recommendations,
max, it feels
they
like.
value the first one highest, right? So being at the top, it still matters in AI. There was zero proof of that until now. And so now the question is just like, what prompts do you measure? Do you measure them, quote unquote, accurately? But we can now say finally that there is an order to these things, and we have a structure that users evaluate results from.
Yeah, I will challenge one thing that you just said. There was zero proof until now. And we did have some signals. They were really challenging to get to. And we have the benefit of having this, in our little logo set here on the slides, this Zofu.com, our AI visibility tool. And so we've been looking at query fanouts. And query fanouts have kind of this really interesting, pretty limited shelf life, I think, for us to get to. Kevin, you mentioned earlier, we're not getting analytics from AI systems. And so we have a pretty limited view of data. But one thing that we do have for some of the platforms is we can track their query fanouts. And just to kind of level set here for everybody, when I'm seeing what I'm referring to as a query fanout is when I provide a prompt, the AI system, there's enough in the prompt to trigger search. The AI system then goes and runs several little queries in order to ground itself in my prompts, and then generate the answer for me. And so those query fanouts are trackable in some degrees. We're seeing less and less of them, which makes sense. The AI systems are moving toward their own index. They're not necessarily sending API calls to Google that we can easily track. So, and the models are evolving just in crazy breakneck speeds. So I get why we're starting to lose query fanouts. And it's not that they're not grounding themselves anymore. It's just a lot of them have their own repositories, and that sort of thing. And certainly we don't see the same thing on the Google side, unfortunately. But what we do see is the 10 blue links below. And we know that there is a clear set of steps that happen from that original prompt. It's classified in terms of the intent, and then something happens to it. It's the AI system decides it's going to maybe decompose it into these individual query fanouts like I'm talking about, and run those return results that gets that retrieval set, and then it cherry picks from that, a pretty limited amount of that, cherry picks from it in order to inform that AI answer. And so we've been tracking these query fanouts, and it's fascinating to see, for a given query or a given set of prompts, we call them topic clusters in Zofu speak, what the list of query fanouts ends up being. Are there overlaps, semantically similar overlaps between within those topic clusters. What is the retrieval set from those fan outs? What is the AI system learning? How are the descriptors that the AI system is already attributed to a particular brand or a product? How are those being influenced by the query fanouts and the retrieval set sort of thing? So it's really been fascinating to look at the data. I'm chagrined to see it shrinking, as the AI systems build alternate methods, but we have had some data in there to look at, and it's really fascinating to see that even with all of that, as good as the AI systems are, knowing that there is some level of hallucination or maybe incorrect information, we're still picking the top results 74% of the time. So not to belabor the issue, but really is fascinating especially when you get into the data and you see all the things that are happening behind the scenes. To get to that point where you're on that list and you're being chosen 74% of the time if you're that top position in that top position. So the converse of that is kind of, not totally, but kind of, if you're not in the list to some degree, you kind of really don't exist, at least to that user in that moment of time based on that particular AI answer.
Totally. So what you're showing here is essentially the share of the top 3 products across categories. So on the very left hand, we have laptops. You see that the top 3 products in that category command 93% essentially of attention in that category, right? So very, very concentrated. And then interestingly, television is the opposite. And I guess it's, because television is, the specs matter, but they're much more comparable across products, where with laptops, you have obviously the whole like Apple series against all the other ones. And I assume that has a certain concentration effect here. But it just goes to show that you need to deeply understand the category that you're playing in, whether it's software or it's consumer products or e-commerce, doesn't matter. But you need to understand the category, and you need to deeply understand, is this a concentrated category or not? I've also seen this on the software side with categories like CRM software, right? And it reflects, I would say, broad market share as well. This is not just an AI search phenomena, but across the market, you have Salesforce, you have HubSpot, and then maybe a smaller third one. And then you have a lot of really small CRMs, right? So, and very similar in most other categories, right? So that we see these concentration effects, it's critical to be aware of them. And then once you are aware of them, you need to deeply differentiate yourself from the rest of the category. So if you are a laptop manufacturer, right? You say you're a framework, you just released a new laptop, you better make sure that you're clearly differentiated from Apple and from, maybe Chrome books or whatever else. And Framework does a good job at that, right? They have these modular components. But that is the game now. You need to deeply understand your users and then see how you can differentiate yourselves. Otherwise, there's no way to compete with better specs in this category.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, we're talking about these high-level takeaways, but that's a really great call out, is one key element of that, which is in one of the slides, in terms of how do you make this actionable? What do we do with this information that we're chatting about here? And one of those is understand exactly what you're describing there, Kevin. Really understand your space, know what it looks like, because you're right. It just, in this example of these 4 categories, what a huge swing between laptops and television. Great call out. Maybe it will be in your space, it will be closer to the difference between washer and dryer and television, where there's not that much differentiation. But if it's like the laptop example here, or something like insurance in between, this becomes really important. And so one of the key next steps is to really understand where your space is. Not a lot of information out there directly from the AI systems. Of course, we have, we can dig into Google Search Console data. That's pretty interesting to see, especially when we can get down to the point where we can see some of those query fanouts as they're being run for however long we still have that that view. But really, it's looking at some level of data. I'm just going to back this to this slide, where you can see kind of this view where we're understanding where the concentrations are. or are they not concentrated as much? In some industries, maybe you can kind of play in the middle of the pack to a greater degree, sort of thing. But laptops, like you pointed, because of the specs and because of that element of it, it's pretty critical to be at the top, because since 93% of all of those outcomes are concentrated in the top 3 results.
Yes.
So here's the next piece I wanted to dig into. Do you want to talk from this perspective?
Yeah, sure. So super interesting here. We obviously compared. I mean, quick side note about the study design. You can almost imagine this like an A/B test, which is super valuable and very rare. So A/B test in a sense that we gave participants these tasks, and we gave them the same task across classic search compared to AI mode. Right, so AI mode starts in AI mode, classic search starts on google.com, which means that users might encounter AI overviews or have encountered AI overviews in some cases, but they still include the classic search results. And so what's really interesting is that even though AI overviews are obviously a form of AI, people cross-check and cross-validate a lot more than in AI mode. So in AI mode, they type in the tasks, they get the recommendation, and they take it as the bare word. In AI overviews, or better said, in the classic search experience, users will browse, they will click, they will research, and they will compare. And this goes directly back to the first slide that we were showing, where we're saying that 88% adopted the recommendation from AI mode. Now, that looks very, very different when it comes to the classic search experience. And we see the same thing here, right? Like people click to Reddit, they click to YouTube in some cases to see if other users are saying the same thing. And so the last thing that I'll say is that we have seen this type of behavior before in a previous user behavior study about AI overviews, where users will get the answer from AI and then go to Reddit or go to YouTube and check if other people are saying the same thing. And we see those same findings reflected here. And as you know, one study is not deterministic. It's not kind of the final answer. But as soon as you accumulate a couple of studies and you see the same patterns occur over and over, all of a sudden you come to a certain truth. And I think we're looking at a truth here.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, very true. That was something that was interesting too, as I kind of plugged into and listened to a few of the audio scripts, that went through from the study, and it was really interesting to see, because that was the value of the gold, was they were voicing everything out loud. They were voicing their thoughts, their actions, what they were seeing on the screen out loud. So it's so interesting to hear, especially on the conventional search side of things, where some, in some cases they'd be like, oh, that AI overviews, oh, that's AI, I don't want to look at that. And they would scroll past it. And they would spend more time on the product listing ads or Google shopping section or something like that. So it was really interesting to hear from a human behavior perspective how individuals were interpreting the information that they were seeing. And there was a lot more there's so much more to explore on the traditional search with the universal SERP, with all of the different aspects, and also digging into people also ask and people also search for, and all those different, and then, hey, oh, look at that. After, 80% of the time they're going to spend on that screen, oh, it's the 10 blue links. Look at those. Oh, a little sentimental. I remember those. And, they talk through or maybe click on one of those two things. But it's really interesting to see in aggregate, how people were doing that search, and things like this really stood out, where it was just very few of the searches in AI mode involved an external site visit, and there were no constraints on anyone to to stay in AI mode or to stay on the conventional Google page. It was just, here's your starting point, now perform this search, sort of thing. So it was really fascinating to see that user behavior. And you're right, this is a pretty key aspect of the outcome from the study.
Totally.
Okay, so just to make it clear how things have shifted, and so some quick call outs here. Probably everybody on this knows these things already, but just wanted to take an opportunity to just kind of have a okay, where are we now sort of slide, sort of thing. This blended search experience that ties in these different aspects of what we're used to, the universal SERP with all the different snippets that are represented there. share what that looks like. AI overviews when it shows up, and it shows up quite a bit, although, in different ways. It might be collapsed, it might be expanded right out of the gate. And we're seeing even that shift really dramatically in a very short period of time. And then there's, of course, the dive deeper, or the click over, when someone clicks right over into AI mode. And it's really is, from a user experience perspective, not to take anything away from any other LLMs or AI systems, but it's a really nice, seamless experience for me to see the AI overview, especially if I expand it myself and then I click dive deeper, and it takes my query and hands it off to AI mode and then continues to go from there. I mean, the experience for the user, regardless of what it means for our jobs, which, it's tough to kind of set that aside because that's pretty important. But regardless of what it means for our jobs, if we think about it from the user experience, things have really been enhanced and evolved in just no time flat in a really meaningful way. But one thing I wanted to call out here was number 3, and I don't mean to bury the lead, is that the traditional 10 blue links are still there. And they matter. It becomes the foundation. It's not the presentation layer necessarily. It's more the foundational layer, the logic layer, if you will. If you think about, a website that's serving content dynamically, which is really what Google absolutely is, it becomes the logic layer, almost kind of underneath. You could still open the hood and see what's underneath the the AI and the overview and the the AI mode conversation, but really it still matters. That's from an SEO perspective. If we want to talk about why our jobs still matter, they still matter because that's what the AI system is using to ground itself, to retrieve that content and information and build its answer. And so, as we've been talking about less and less about those traditional 10 blue links, they still are the foundation. And that's where we're getting those. That's why I mentioned the query fanouts earlier, and what's happening when we are getting into that, maybe uncomfortable conversation with our boss or the CMO or the board of directors, depending on, what level we're at. The investment that organizations have made in SEO is not wasted, and it's just as important in so many ways. It's just that it's a little bit less visible because of this new enhanced experience, that we're seeing.
Yeah, totally on the money. SEO is still very important. I mean, there's some other research that I did finding that for ChatGPT, for example, right, like retrieval rank is by far the biggest determinator of whether you're visible or not in the answer. So even outside of Google, very much seem the same thing. And I would even take it a step further, or build on top of this and say that it's critical to understand how, which prompts return a shortlist or recommendation and where you're present.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would add is I would monitor prompts with a higher priority that return these shortlists consistently over time. As we know, every prompt or every run of a prompt can return slightly different outputs or answers. But where are shortlists coming up consistently? Where are brand mentions coming up consistently? And how are you reflected here? So again, I think this is critical research because it helps us understand that it's not just enough to have a broad lens. You also need to zoom in or click a couple of times and truly understand what the prompts are that have a higher weight when people make purchase decisions versus prompts where, maybe they're not that close yet to even compare a product.
Yeah, great. Yeah, absolutely. Great points. So just, a quick snapshot of language that seemed warranted to kind of reinforce with leadership. And namely, these should be known, but buyers are still using search. The key aspect is that Google is doing, and AI systems generally doing so much more to help answer that question before it gets to the point where there's a click. And so double clicking on that, if you will, is a huge value add in terms of the information that we're passing on inside our organizations, our ability to keep our tenure in the companies that we work, and also understand where we go from here, what sort of shifts we need to make, the shifts that you're mentioning, Kevin, in terms of understanding these critical aspects of the prompts, the ones that matter the most, And then measuring the visibility that we have around those prompts, especially the consistent ones, the ones that are more likely to result in that actual, the now the less frequent actual click, the actual visit, lower in the funnel, where the visits and likely the conversions, the engagements are going to happen, where that buyer journey gets close to making a decision, especially when it involves that final step of the click to do that final research and essentially check the boxes that they've sort of homed in on in the conversation with the AI system, and now they're getting to the point where they're ready to make that decision. The key aspect is that it's not just the click alone. It's that tells the whole story, and so focusing on that aspect of it as well can help us really understand essentially where we're going.
Yeah, totally. It's really about visibility. And look, I think AI search can be a hard sell to leadership. Again, right now, there's still a lot of excitement coming from leadership. But I think, in the future, it might tone down to some degree. And the way to keep this alive, in my mind, is to do what used to annoy me very much. And that is when I would, in the classic search times, pre-AI, when I would talk to executives, they would sometimes say, "Hey, Kevin, I Googled blah, 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 and we're not number one. Why is that?" I was like, "Oh gosh, like, please." And then, look, I get it, but it's also very simplistic. However, with all this research that we've now just seen, I think like one direct channel to leadership to help them conceptualize AI search and what we're doing is to just say, look, from the AI to return a shortlist or a recommendation for the product or company that you're working at. And isn't it important to be showing up here, right? Can we not infer that over 1 billion people are using ChatGPT alone, and we know that I think Google, I forgot the latest numbers, but it's like pretty much everyone on the planet uses Google. And can we not like agree that there is a market that searches and gets these shortlists, and we need to be present here because we now know that shortlists are important. So I think what leadership needs is a direct channel or like a way to make sense of AI search. And because we now know that shortlists are important, we can make that very visual to them and say, look, here's how we appear. Shouldn't we fix that? And that is the way in my mind to keep that long-term excitement alive.
Yeah. The great call outs. And so data studies like this are really helpful. They help us understand what's happening in the space, especially as it evolved and just this, this rapid fire rate that's happening, this extremely quick pace that we're seeing, especially with the level of competition where, the versions are getting released so quickly to compete with each other that it's just kind of insanity almost to try to keep up with it. But even though we have to, sort of thing. So, but getting a better understanding is a critical aspect of it. Digging in, as you mentioned before, Kevin, to where your visibility is in your space, in your particular vertical, in that niche. That's a critical aspect of it. And then in terms of, helping to frame up the conversation, everybody reports to somebody. So how do we get our boss to really be able to feel confident when they go into the next meeting with their boss, or if it's the CMO or the CEO going in front of the board, that sort of thing. We can help that process. We can help them sort of trickle up, if you will, in terms of the information and the knowledge by helping to establish a better measurement frame. And so thinking about it from the perspective of, kind of going through down the list as a little bit of a framework to help better understand where things are from a visibility perspective. Just as you mentioned, Kevin, it's not about the clicks, it's about the visibility. And do we have that visibility? So how often do these important queries trigger, like the ones that you were talking about, and how often do they trigger an AI overview? How often do we get the expanded AI overview, especially in the dive deeper into AI mode, or the equivalent experience inside a different AI system? Is the brand present in those answers? And a lot of this can just be individual manual research. It doesn't necessarily have to be at scale to get some idea about this, and you can check across multiple platforms. Are we being cited but not mentioned clearly. This is another one, is it sort of like ghost mention, where we get the citation, but we're not actually explicitly mentioned in the results, or we're mentioned very broadly, where other brands get more specific call outs in there. You know, that's an indication that there's maybe not a level of confidence with your brand. It doesn't have the same visibility. It's in the running, so to speak, but it's not going to be at the top of the podium, sort of, sort of kind of, I'm mixing my metaphors, but a different kind of analogy. Where does it sit in that recommendation set? Like you're talking about the importance of that recommendation set, and how are other things being influenced beyond this early influence of showing up in the AI answer? What happens after that? We've talked throughout my career ad nauseum about multi-channel attribution and the relationship between organic search and paid search and social, and now the various AI platforms and owned media versus earned media, and all these different aspects of it. I think in a lot of ways it's time to revisit that that concept of the multiple attribution customer journey, if you will, and what's happening even outside of those platforms, behind the scenes in meetings. How are things being discussed? Who are the stakeholders involved in those transactions and or those decisions? And that committee, that purchase decision committee behind the scenes, especially for major purchases and things like SaaS that you were mentioning before, Kevin. What all are all of those conversations? What's happening in all of those conversations, and what are the sources that they're going to in order to get more information about these things? And how is our visibility in the AI answer influencing that, as well? Especially because everybody's going to search a little bit of a different way. So the answer, as we mentioned, and we've had so many conversations about probabilistic versus deterministic and all of those things, but somebody's going to get a little bit of a different set. And you made a great call out earlier, Kevin, about finding the ones that matter, where we're consistently, seeing either our visibility increase or where we're not seeing an increase and we know we need to be, sort of thing. So that's another aspect of it as well.
100%. There was this very interesting case in the study. And again, there's video footage of these participants, which I strongly suggest everybody watch. But there was this interesting case of one of the participants who was evaluating insurance, and he was looking in AI mode at 3 different options. And one of the options had it wasn't a discount, but like some sort of like a loyalty program or so going on. And that was explicitly mentioned in the AI mode answer, but it was not mentioned for the 2 other brands. And so that participant specifically called out, oh, they have this program going on. I like that a lot. I'll come back to this, right? So
I remember that. Yeah, I remember
exactly,
that.
Exactly. So just to highlight your point, how important it is how you're represented, right? Are you part of the answer? And then how are you part of the answer, right? Because you can get a mention in the AI answer, but it can be mentioned as the worst product or the best product, and it obviously matters. So that is some intelligence and monitoring we still need to develop.
Yeah, it matters a whole heck of a lot, for sure. So what do we do now? Search is incredibly important. It influences selection. There's this stage where the kind of the reporting model needs to play catch up. I remember this stage with Google, as well, where before Search Console, especially before the current more modern version of Search Console, where actually there was a stage where we had a lot more keyword data, which ended up going away. But it goes through cycles where we haven't had the view that we have finally landed on, essentially the more modern view of GA4 and Search Console and third-party tools that we're used to. And so much of that has gone away in terms of our ability to feel confident about the numbers that we're able to deliver. That's why these studies are really important. And the work, Kevin, you do so much work along these lines and help draw attention to what's really happening in the space. That's critical. And so we're in sort of this gap. It's sort of a lag of having the reporting model that shows what currently is happening. That's why these studies was so insightful. But a key aspect of this is, where are your buyers doing their research? Is it Google? Are they going to ChatGPT, you mentioned, or Claude or Perplexity, or, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? There's so many of them, to consider, while still the majority of search is happening on Google. But, then it's not the traditional Tenbu link Google. It's AI overviews and AI mode, or some mix of those sort of things. So doing this research and better understanding what's happening with your core buyers is critical, and a lot of it's pretty manual. So we help out where we can with Zofu, and just like a quick commercial here, just you can go to zofu.com and click snapshot and run for free without logging in. You can kind of get a sense for snapshot in time, visibility. A lot of other tools have a similar model where you can get some idea, but it's really kind of on us to be able to start digging, to take the onus and start digging in and better understanding, what's happening with in this period where we have this lag. We don't have the high confidence level of data that we're used to, the reporting that we're used to. So what do we do, essentially? And a lot of it's kind of manual digging in, understanding where they're doing their research, looking at the query set that matters, right back to what you said, Kevin, determining how these are being triggered in AI answers and what those surfaces look like, and then measuring whether you show up, sort of thing.
Yep, exactly. All of those. Luckily, it's not like, it's an evolution of search, but it's not foreign, I would say, to anybody tuning in or anybody watching this. But there's some new nuance, right? Like the probabilistic aspect is pretty new. The ranking we know. So I think we can like repurpose, I would say, or maybe recycle a lot of reflexes that we had for a long time. But you don't want to get stuck there.
Yeah, very true. Good point. Zofu, as I mentioned, I already gave that you run a free snapshot. That's a really nice way to get, just within a few seconds, a better understanding of where you are in terms of your visibility. And then just a quick call out about Citation Labs and citation optimization, which is a service that we offer. It's a process of increasing your citations, increasing those trust signals, of course, that we know backlinks and off-domain mentions and content are critical in the process of strengthening. And so we can provide that service. And then just kind of a really cool call out too, we have an offering at the hyper-local level where we've built a pretty substantial database and network of hyperlocal sponsorships, local nonprofit community organizations that are doing good in where it really matters, especially to them in those local communities. And we just hit a new milestone for us, which is that we've facilitated $10 million in sponsorship donations going to those organizations since we kicked off ZipSprout. So we're just really proud of and hold that close to our heart that we're able to help facilitate doing good in the community. And in a very large degree, these are not dollars that they would have, it's not just that it's coming through a different channel, it's coming through ZipSprout and it would have gone through them directly. These are net new sponsorship dollars that are going to these organizations. And we think about it as, link building, you can feel good about it. It's at the local level, you get a link on a sponsorship thank you page. It adds a nice trust signal, and you're doing good in local communities. So I just wanted to call out that, that big new milestone that we hit. And that's a wrap. What else do you want to cover here, Kevin? Or do we want to take questions? I haven't been looking at the chat. Has anything come through? What are your wrap-up thoughts here?
Man, again, big study. It honestly made me think in a different way, because I used to put a lot more weight on like aggregate metrics like AI visibility and citation share. And I still think these are interesting, but these to me are a little bit like the impressions in the classic Google search game. And the new clicks to me are then these short list positions. What I will say is, I think it's important to run prompts consecutively very quickly, like 3 to 5 times through a tracking tool, just to see what sticks and what not. As I mentioned earlier, AI answers have a lot of volatility. So you want to understand, is this shortlist just a one-time occurrence, or is this actually a staple? But aside from that, I've now started to incorporate that much more into my reporting. And it also resonates much, much more. The interesting thing, and I leave this with like an open-ended kind of, I don't know, type of point, but the interesting thing is that there's such a harder contrast between what I would call top of the funnel and bottom of the funnel. So shortlists are obviously a bottom of the funnel type of result. And I found that there's not an equivalent yet really for top of the funnel, right? You can, as soon as you talk about brand mentions, you're already in the middle of the funnel in my, philosophy. So anyway, long story short is like, I don't know how important the top of the funnel is anymore. And my gut says it's much more about middle and bottom of the funnel, but we finally have, like, again, some research, some pointers showing us or basically validating that users really care about that.
Yeah, true. That's a good point about top of the funnel. The interesting thing is, in a lot of ways, the answer to that, or the journey essentially from that top of funnel, we think about it as what might be solved with the blog post, kind of an informational blog post, guide, that sort of thing. It's all happening in real time right in front of us after we hit enter on to send our prompt, and then the AI system does that query fan out. They're essentially in some ways solving for top of the funnel by going and doing that research, gathering the information, classifying the prompt in terms of its intent, decomposing it down into those individual queries, and then kind of backfilling that as well for any sort of missing points based on those query fanouts that it runs. Sometimes we see 3 fanouts in a prompt, in a grounding layer. Sometimes we see 100 query fanouts in that grounding layer because they're doing more and more research. They're not confident in what they found in the first few fanouts. They're running more to better understand what the key aspects of this are. It's almost like they're solving for that top of funnel need, and right in the initial process, even if we don't necessarily ask a bottom of funnel sort of question, they're taking us there as part of that journey before we even see their answer. So yeah, really good call out about top of funnel, and to what degree does that still sort of exist. It seems like in a lot of ways they're essentially doing their best to kind of eliminate our need to be able to have that journey at the very top of the the research, the information gathering phase as part of the service that they offer.
Yeah, totally. It's very interesting how AI compresses a bunch of stuff. And you see this in e-commerce as well, right? You see this in SaaS a lot. So it's fascinating. I actually noticed a question from Adam. I want to play that over to you, James, real quick, and see what your take is. And I'm happy to add my own as well. So Adam asked, what tools do you recommend for identifying quantifiable shortlist prompts to track and volume? I feel a big sticking point is the lack of volume data I've seen from existing prompt tracking AI tool sets. Really good question. James, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question, Adam. Yeah, solid. I think we're all in the same boat from that perspective. And this was one of your call outs, Kevin, is we just have very limited view on the reporting side of things at this stage. That'll evolve over time. It'll evolve once they can monetize it. So, once they're running ads in answers, in AI answers, there's incentive for them to be able to offer the data, just as it happened with Google, as well, when they introduced Google AdWords and the CPC model. That's when we started getting the data. And so to a large degree, I imagine it would be similar to that. When they can monetize that data, they'll start sharing that data. Until then, it is a little bit tricky to get to what you're looking for here. How can you quantifiably identify shortlist prompts? That's pretty challenging. We do it in a way that is strategic and based on the data that we're seeing inside the tool Zofu, but it's a very extensive process to get down to the point where we can really understand what that shortlist of prompts is. And we're not really going the shortlist route. We need to cast a pretty wide net here. We want to be structured about it. We want to have the right approach. We want to understand intent. And the complexity of a search will have a big impact on that. But it's tough to get to a shortlist right now, I think, because of the it's a sort of a self-fulfilling issue here. We don't have very much data, so it's tough to get very specific with that data. So we end up having to go with a lot of data. But to your point, we're running prompts a lot and aggregating that data and not necessarily cherry picking from a list of prompts. I think that's pretty important, and that was a good call out. And in terms of tracking volume, that's really tricky because, you know, if we're talking about Search Console, for example, if you dig, and you a lot of times, especially for larger brands, we really do have to dig, but you can find all of these zero-click searches that are very structured in the words that they're using, too structured for a human to be putting that many words in a sentence and searching for it, sort of thing. So that's one way, you know, Adam, that you might be able to manually and for free start to dig in and maybe better understand what sort of shortlist prompts you want to look at. Could be based on understanding that query fan out process and what might be hitting your own site in terms of the impressions that you're seeing, not clicks. They will not result in clicks, but they will result in impressions. And so that could be one way. A lot of tools have their own methodology, you know, associated with kind of how you get to that point. But right now, we're casting a pretty wide net with Zofu, and then manually reviewing that, and we're providing the tools in the UI to help you do that. But manually reviewing that to get down to the point where you get a sense for what the prompts are in that sort of manually built shortlist. What do you recommend, Kevin?
Yeah, I love your point about the wide net. I think we've established that this is a probabilistic system, meaning, I mean, I'm not going to explain it. Everybody knows what this is by now. So the point is, you're not going to find the perfect prompt. And so in my client work, you know, we don't try to understand exactly what people are prompting, and instead we're casting a wide net, as in so far that we're tracking a lot of prompts at the beginning, and then we're seeing which of those consistently trigger shortlists, and then we put special attention on those specific ones. Now, we feed that and we support that with qualitative evidence, for example, from customer conversations or audience research, market research, right? There's a lot of qualitative data that you need to use here. And then I think there is a little bit of validity to using quantifiable data from classic search because, and again, this is in my mind directional, but you could largely say, okay, if you have, say, a topic like laptops, right? So you might, I think it's still fair to say, okay, let's look at the search volume across, say, you know, the most important keywords in that topic. And then we have a rough size of what the overall market looks like. And now we can map our prompts related to laptops to that market size. And the goal is not to say, oh, this keyword has exactly as much search volume as this prompt. It's much more to get a sense of market size and then be able to say, okay, we think that these are the most important prompts based on shortlists that they generate. And we can now get a comparative value based on that keyword search volume for how much market size that roughly is. Again, whenever you try to extrapolate to search volume, to map search volume to prompts, you never come out right. But for market sizing and prioritization, I think this is very valuable. So those are kind of some of the things that I use in my work.
That's a great call out. And yeah, you're not going to get it perfect, but we certainly can inform the prompts that we're using, that we're tracking from that perspective. And the nice thing about going back to the traditional search that we've been so focused on is that we have a better sense for where the conversions are with the traditional head or mid-tail terms, for example. We're going to understand that a little bit better. We know how they land, what pages they land on, so we can get a sense for kind of mapping that aspect of it, you know, as well. So yeah, that's a great call. And I also like what you said about customer data, you know, customer support logs, interviews with sales reps. Those can be really valuable data points that you can use to your competitive advantage in understanding what people are looking for and build content around it as well. And so if you don't want to talk about what's the word I'm trying to think of, like your secret weapon, for example, in terms of a unique, interesting data point that an AI system would consider retrieving and including in their AI answer. When you have first-party data that paints a picture for them, introduces some sort of interesting aspect of a purchase decision, that's kind of gold. So yeah, going back to your own customer data, your own first party data can be hugely helpful. Tying that to the traditional search keywords that we've all been tracking for decades and have a level of intimate familiarity with, that can really help you kind of reverse engineer the process of getting to the prompts that might matter the most.
Yeah, exactly that. So evolution, right? Not a complete pivot, and I think that maps back to the research that we found.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks for putting this together. If anybody on the call in the meeting here or watching this later hasn't checked out Kevin's write-up on this or write-ups on this, it's great stuff. It frames it up really nicely. You mentioned the recordings on there, which is really interesting to dig into and understand behavior. Especially in light of the decades-long saga about do search engines, I won't name anyone specifically, but do search engines use behavioral data? No, and then it turns out because they have to, because they're under oath. Oh yes, sort of thing. So we can sort of take a chapter from that book and really dig into the behavior data, and this is a unique, pretty expensive, so you're getting it free, a way to understand human behavior as it relates to these specific product areas that we did the study was run on. So thank you so much for putting that together and putting this together. Appreciate the time that we've had to chat, Kevin, and I look forward to the next time.
Yeah, thanks to you also and the team again for funding this and putting this together. You said it on the sidelines, but it's worth highlighting. These studies are expensive and there's a lot of effort going into them. So this is not a quick SQL query. This is weeks of work and recruiting panels and recording and evaluating and analyzing. So kudos to you and the whole team. And of course, thanks so much for having me, and thanks to everybody who tuned in.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kevin.